welcome to Growing Up White. It's weird. Now, the reason I added the "it's weird" part is simply because I want you to know that I know some of the things I'm telling you will probably sound weird. Okay, so let's get right into it. Book 1, Chapter 1, Dad is Dead. You might be wondering, why do I start with my father dying? Well, you see, as humans, or as any species, we all have two things in common: birth and death. Now, when it comes to birth, the only thing we seem to be fascinated with is perhaps the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary and the birth of Jesus Christ, but that's for someone else to talk about. Let's just focus on death. We as humans, it seems, have a fascination with death. Of course, unless it's our own death, then we don't talk about that. But the death of others, especially when it comes to, say, a murder mystery or some true crime or some serial killer, there have been books and TV shows and movies made about so many of them. Or perhaps a celebrity dies and we want to know right away, why did they die so young? Was there a jealous ex involved? Was there some kind of foul play or drugs involved? We want to know why and how did the celebrity die? When it comes to my father's death, it was really nothing special, just your ordinary, basic, non-eventful human death. It was 1991. My father was 61. I was 31 and recently moved away from home. Now, that's not to say I just moved at 31 away from home. No, I'm not one of those kids who just stay around home and sponge off their parents all they can. No, I left at age 28. Now, you might be thinking, 28, that's still kind of weird, right? Well, yes and no. I've known people who at 18 graduated high school, get out of their parents' house, get an apartment down the street, around the block, or the next town over. But you see, I had done a lot with my life up until the age of 28. I started working when I was 12 years old in the restaurant of a hotel Holiday Inn where my mother worked, in the pantry. And I got hired as a dishwasher at 12 years old, which I guess you could say was some kind of violation of a child labor law. But I didn't care. I just wanted to work and make some money. So there I was working with other dishwashers who were at the age of 16 and older, because in that town you could work at age 16. And how they would pay me was not with a check. They would add the money onto my mother's account. So I was really working, I guess you could say, off the books. Now, does that sound weird? Okay, well, let's try this. When I stopped working there, I went to work at another place, a pancake house, under my older brother's name, simply because he was 16, he wasn't working, and I wanted to work. Of course, the problem was when they called me by his name and I didn't answer. So I would either ask them to just use my last name or my nickname, Shorty. And the reason why Shorty is because at the age of 12 or 13, I looked very young for my age. And if I was supposed to be 16, I looked even younger. So the idea was that I was a preemie baby, and therefore I looked so young. Then when I turned 16, I didn't have to pretend anymore. So far, what you know about my growing up white is my father died at age 61. I started working at age 12, and I moved across country at the age of 28. So there I am, back at home with my mother, my younger brother, and my older brother. Now, when it comes to death and funerals, everything is business. For example, the body is at the funeral home. It has to go to Arlington National Cemetery because my father was in the Army. We need to pick out a casket, and as a family, we have to decide. Now, of course, the funeral director points us to the top of the line $20,000 casket. And of course, we're all in a weakened state, not knowing what to do, never having done this before, and ready to accept whatever they tell us to do. However, I have a brief moment of financial reality. As I look around the room, I see one in the corner and I ask, what is that one over there? Basically, it's a tin box. So the funeral director kind of shrugs, but we make our way over there and I ask how much. And he replies, oh, $5,000. It's not that grand, but my rationalization is he's dead, he's not going to see it, and it's just going to end up buried in the ground and no one will ever see it again. So we end up with a compromise. Now we get to the body. My mother has picked out a suit to dress the body. And the reason I call it the body is simply because it is just a body. It's not my father anymore. And when I first saw the body dressed up in the suit, my first thought was, is that a wax figure? Now, you might have seen a wax figure before at some museum where they have celebrities or some kind of historical figures on display. But my father's body was just a bad version of that. So there we are, standing around the casket with the body. And then we had the viewing where people come by and share a story about my father. Sometimes they cry, sometimes we cry, and then they all leave. And we are left alone with the body. And I do something that is kind of weird. So I'm looking at the body and I have this brief moment of emotional overwhelm. I bend down and I kiss the body. And it's cold and it's hard, just like a wax figure. Next thing, they send the body down to Arlington National Cemetery. We drive down for the day. They have the funeral with honors. My mother gets the flag, then we drive back home. My father's death was the very first death of a family member, friend, or relative that I had ever known. So it was new to me. The only death I've known prior to that was of a pet. For example, a mouse or a guinea pig, you would take the body, put it in a shoebox, take it out back, dig a hole, bury it in your yard, or if you didn't have a yard, go down to the woods and bury it in the woods. And then there was Fifi. Fifi was my favorite guinea pig. You see, my father was in the Army for 22 years. So for the first 10 years of my life, he wasn't around that much. But he made sure if it was Christmas or a birthday, one of his boys would get a gift. Actually, it was my mother doing it because my father was awful at gift giving. And the reason I named her Fifi was because I was born in Paris, France. And no, I do not speak French because I was only there for a year. And we would have to move every 2 years depending on what my father's next assignment was. Recently, I saw a picture of me at about age 7 with Fifi on my lap. And she was a tricolor guinea pig, black, gold, and white. And in the picture, I am sitting in a tent. Not a real tent, but the kind you make from your mother's clothesline. What you do is you take a blanket, you drape it over the clothesline as in a triangle shape, and you take clothespins and push them into the end of the blanket to secure it in the ground, and then you put a blanket underneath, and you have a tent. And next to the tent was a garage or large shed that sat directly behind the house we were renting. And it had a pointed roof, also like a triangle. And what we would do as kids, we would climb up on the roof, and me, wearing my cowboy boots, would jump off the roof onto the ground. That's what we did as white kids in a white family in a white neighborhood. Since my father was moving us every 2 years, I only had Fifi for 1 year, simply because his next assignment was Hawaii. And as a family, we all voted to go. But Fifi could not go to Hawaii. However, since guinea pigs can live longer than 2 years, sometimes up to 5 years, my mother decided to take Fifi and have her stay with her best friend's family, which was about 10 minutes away from where we were living. My mother had grown up with this woman in South Philly, and they were best of friends. And many times, her family and our family would do things together. Her family consisted of 6 children, 2 girls and 4 boys, and they were all older than me. The youngest boy was a year older, and then everyone else after that by multiples of 2 until you get to the oldest boy, who was 11 years older than me. Okay, let's get a little weird now. We would call them cousins, and their mother and father we would refer to aunt and uncle, and they would do the same thing about my mother and father. My mother's friend and her husband were my godmother and godfather. And no, it's nothing like the movie The Godfather. It was some kind of Catholic tradition. Now, I did have some real cousins, but we never really saw them because they didn't live close by. And I did have a couple of aunts and uncles. On my father's side, my aunt and uncle also did not live close by. However, on my mother's side, I had an aunt and uncle who did live close by, but here's where it's a little weird. Okay, let's take a step back first. My grandparents. On my father's side, I only knew my grandmother, not my grandfather. The only thing I knew about him was he was a firefighter in Atlantic City, New Jersey, where he raised his family. My father was the eldest child. Then there were 2 more, a boy and a girl, who would be my real aunt and uncle. And the story I was told was that my grandfather, my father's father, had died early on. And that was it. We never spoke about him. I only knew my grandmother, aunt, and uncle on my father's side for a short time because they eventually moved away long before my father died. Okay, now my mother's side of the family. Since my mother's mother, my grandmother, lived nearby, I did get to see her on some occasions. But as with my father's father, I never got to meet my mother's father. His story is a bit different because originally he also had died early. But then later, I come to find out that he never married my grandmother because his family somehow didn't think she was good enough. So my mother, born out of wedlock, now this is back in the 1930s in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, would have to wait on a corner for her father to sneak away from his family to visit his daughter. Yeah. And again, not much was ever said about him. But my grandmother, my mother's mother, did finally get married later in life. And that is where the weird comes in. My mother referred to him by his first name, let's just say Bob, and I did meet him a few times. And what I remember about him is that besides having the gray hair and wrinkly skin, he had a couple fingers or half fingers missing. He worked with power tools a lot, and that explained it. And he also smoked Camel cigarettes, were cigarettes without a filter. Now, the aunt and uncle part. Since my mother's mother married again and had a boy and a girl, they would be my aunt and uncle. My aunt was 6 months younger than me. So that means my mother and her mother were pregnant at the same time. Yeah, like I said, growing up white, it's weird. And then my uncle was 2 years older than me. Now, since we were so close in age, we were more like cousins, and I didn't refer to them as aunt and uncle. I just called them by their first names. Okay, so to summarize our chapter 1, my father is dead. I started working a real job at age 12 using my older brother's ID. My mother's best friend I refer to as aunt, and her kids as cousins, although we are not blood related. I do have a real aunt and uncle, my aunt being 6 months younger than me. I like to jump off a garage roof wearing cowboy boots. My favorite pet is named Fifi, but now, since we are going to Hawaii, I have to leave her with my fake aunt's family. So with that, let's end chapter 1. Coming up in chapter 2, we go to Hawaii. I have a weird encounter with I'm not really sure what it was. I come back from Hawaii and find out my pet guinea pig, Fifi, has passed away. Little did I know, the eldest boy in that family had a pet snake. And I didn't figure out the truth until much later. Later, as in after he raped me. And that ends chapter 1. Now on to chapter 2.